What is our next item?
Next item is consideration of a watch list of bills and BESE guiding principles regarding bills filed for the Louisiana 2023 regular legislative session. The recommendation is to, number one, receive the watch list, and number two, approve the principal statements.
Is there, yes, there's a motion by Dr. Davis, a second by Ms. Ellis. Do we have any public comment cards at this time? No. Okay. And we did not have any public comment cards last time, correct? Right? Yes, we had a motion by Dr. Davis and second by Ms. Ellis. Did y'all get it? Yeah. Okay. All right, so, yes, Mr. Garvey.
Question for the staff. On the watch list, that's a spreadsheet that has several columns. And one of the columns for legislation that has come to BESE previously that's shown up again because it didn't pass. Is there a column to show whether BESE took a position to support it in prior years?
There is not one that shows like historical perspective just for the sake of space and being able to fit it all on one page. But I'm happy to be able to put that in there of what the historical decision had been. Now the problem will come in because the bills go through various stages, positions may have changed across those stages. So that's the only thing is it may have been a supporter or no position that changed to a supporter, changed to. So I can talk about it in its final form, but that final form may not be the same as its originating form this year.
Right, it wouldn't always be able to be done, but to the extent it could, I would think that BESE members would like to know the history of what BESE has done before.
We can make a notation of that. Yes, sir.
Just a suggestion.
Yeah, definitely.
Thank you. Go ahead, Mr. Malawson.
Okay, so before we jump into the watch list of bills, I wanted to show you the tools and how to navigate the legislative website for some things if you want to do a deeper dig yourself on legislation. So on the screen right now, we have House Bill 12 by Representative Richard Nelson, and I have Ashley who's operating the computer for us so she can show us. From your watch list, there are links that link to the specific bill pages. So when you click one of those links, it'll take you here. If you see the drop-down menu, it says text, digest, and authors. That will expand to where you can see the current form of the bill. So you'll see currently it says original. When you open it, it will show you what the legislation is. If you scroll all the way to the bottom, it will show you the digest of the bill. The digest of the bill tells you currently in law what present law is, and then proposed law, what this bill would change about present law. So it helps give you a deeper understanding of what the legislation is seeking to do. Every time a new version is updated through amendment, through a change that happens, it will update the most recent version. There will also be another drop-down tab that appears as it goes through the process that shows all of the votes that are taken on it, of each member, of each committee, and then any changes that happen or amendments that are proposed, both ones that fail and both ones that stick. So you'll be able to do that. If you look in the top corner, it says sign up, log in. That's where you can set up your own tracking for the bills. Remember, you can only have 50 bills to track on the website at one time. And then the authors, of course, it shows you who wrote the bill, those things. Just want to give you a high-level thing that you can actually dig in deeper if you wanted to on these topics. So, thank you, Ashley. We're going to move back over to the topic bills list, the watch list that is in your packets. And I wanted to take this time to go over a couple pieces of legislation that I think are high priority. Dr. Brumley will assist me in this also and give some input on bills as well. And then after that, we will take questions about specific bills that you may want, because I know a couple members have specific questions about some of the filed bills. I want to remind everyone that what is currently on your screen and in the hopper for the legislative session will not look the same come 2 weeks from now. Every one of these bills will be touched through some type of amendment or change. So remember, it's a living process. This will change. Also, these bills were filed on Friday. Our staff has done an amazing job, giving kudos to this, of analyzing these bills quickly, and they are still building a lot of the legislative briefs that are happening for me to be able to fully explain what it does. We're working with legal and a few other folks to work through that. So we know top line information, but I may not be able to get into very deep specifics at this time. I will at some point, but not right now. So I want you to keep that in mind as we go through this watch list of bills. All right, so the first one that I think we have up is Representative Nelson's, actually the one we just looked at, House Bill 12, which is the mandatory retention of third graders who cannot read at grade level. So what this bill does, it was filed last year, it would require that students could not move forward through the process. I'm also going to ask Dr. Jenna Shefson to come up to explain this a little bit if she wants to. She doesn't have to right now if there's questions. But this bill would require systems to withhold students who are not reading at grade level. It gives them opportunities and interventions to rescreen, and also if they fail that screener, to be able to have interventions to try to gain the reading level each time. There's also, those interventions happen over the course of the summer also, and if they do not, Mr. Morris asked this question earlier, if they do not attend those summer interventions or those interventions, then they are retained. But this bill, we've worked with the author a good bit on it to get it to a point where it's not as disruptive and that there is some local input in this and more chances for the student to be able to get to that level that we need them to for reading. Any questions on that? Yes, ma'am.
So I'd like to know what information the department is preparing to answer questions that were asked in particular in House Ed last session around, so Mississippi has now had this program long enough to see kids that were held back in the third grade, whether or not they make that transition from from 8th grade to high school successfully, right? So the legislators are very concerned about kind of how this affects high school dropout rates, right? And so I'm just curious about that issue, and then also the racial and economic breakdown of the kids that are being held back, because that was another big concern around this bill.
Yes, ma'am. I'll turn it over to Dr. Shefson who can answer some of those questions.
So Dr. Davis, one thing that I think is really important that we now have in this year's session that we didn't have last year is that Boston University actually completed a study, and I'm happy to share that with you if you haven't. Yeah, Boston University completed a study on the Mississippi legislation and the impact that it had on that first group of students that were retained. Just as a reminder, Mississippi's legislation passed in 2013, and so it was that following school year, that 2014-2015. So those first children, they have tracked over time. And the study showed that those particular children, they looked at children who scored right above the threshold and right beneath the threshold, and they compared them over time. And it found that those children who were retained because they fell right under the threshold performed substantially higher on their 6th grade ELA scores. And to your point, I know there was a lot of talk last year about the disproportionality. They actually had some really strong evidence in this study that it also more positively impacted minority students, and that it closed some of those achievement gaps through this initiative.
Do you know if Representative Nelson is aware of the Boston study, and is he sharing it with members of House Education?
I can't say for certain. I was able to meet with Representative Nelson, but that was back in maybe October when he was working on some edits to his bill from last year. We were able to meet on it. So I don't know if I'm thinking he has, but I can make sure.
Would you send a copy of it to me? Because I know some of them, after that committee hearing, had a lot of questions for me about this specifically, and so I would like to be able to share that report. That would be great.
Of course.
Thank you.
And they hold them back in the 3rd grade? Okay.
Mr. Harvey?
Yes, Dr. Shefson. Can you correct me if I'm wrong? My understanding is that Mississippi has, or had, and continues to have, a significant set of interventions that are required to be given to the students in addition to just holding them back. And does Mr. Nelson's bill contain requirements that we would have to provide similar interventions?
Yes, if you do a comparison between this bill and the Mississippi legislation that passed back in 2013, all those things are really similar, like multiple attempts at the assessment, the intensive interventions, both between attempts at the assessment and during that year of retention, so the child be retained. That list of good cause exemptions, which is, the groups of students who this wouldn't fall into this category, like our students with disabilities or our English learners. Those things are all very similar. And so yes, just like Mississippi, what happens during that year of retention is built into this bill as well. The major difference between the Mississippi bill and this legislation this year is there's a difference in the assessment. The Mississippi bill uses their state assessment, so like their Mississippi version of LEAP. This talks about us using our literacy screener that we are already working towards having in place and would administer 3 times next school year already. And so that is different. I think a major cause for that difference is the Mississippi version of that 3rd grade ELA state assessment looks very, very different from our ELA LEAP. Theirs is more of a reading assessment. It doesn't have much, if any, writing on it, so the turnaround for the scoring is very different from us. We could not administer LEAP and then turn around the scoring as quickly as Mississippi is. It's a very different assessment.
Ms. Holloway, or Mr. Garvey?
Yeah, the interventions are costly, I would imagine. Currently, we'd be using stimulus funds to pay for those interventions, and what would happen when those funds run out?
Well, I would remind you all that our required interventions are already in place. They're in policy. When we think about the policy that you all passed a few months ago, asking for those summer interventions, that is in place for the next 2 summers. And then we already see school systems requiring intervention based on those individual reading plans. So one thing built into this bill that we already have are individual reading plans for students falling below grade level in reading. Those reading plans spell out the interventions that would take place for students. And so I would say the costs are indeterminable. That's what we would write on the fiscal note for the locals in providing those interventions. Can they be costly? Yes. Can they also be built into a school day and using materials that are already a part of their curriculum, or many materials that we offer free in our literacy library? So I think the costs are indeterminable when it comes to those interventions that would take place during the school day, but it would depend on how local systems choose to implement those interventions.
So to piggyback on that, in regards to the literacy screener, does Mississippi have a consistent literacy screener for every district or county, whatever they have? Whereas please correct me, that we are not consistent with our literacy screener.
They are using a consistent statewide assessment. We would be as well, because that is our plan beginning next school year. Right, you are correct right now, Ms. Holloway, that right
There's
now
no consistency.
there are 4 different ones for them to choose from,
Yeah, yes.
but that shift is being made for us to have one consistent statewide.
Okay, and I would venture to say your interventions within each district is inconsistent, that it's not.
It's not the same.
It's not the same. So that's number 2. And the third, actually the first, we've already tried failure in 4th grade, and it didn't work. So here we are attempting to do this when I know that we don't have accountability in K1 and 2. And so when does this, I didn't see the year, when is this supposedly?
I believe Representative Nelson has this beginning after the BESE policy would fade out. So almost, I know we talked, I believe Dr. called that a bridge policy. And so the next 2 summers would be those summer interventions that you all passed, the required summer interventions, and then it would be the year after that.
Which means what grade are these children in now? That would be effective, so they're in K now. So I have a hard time with this.
Implementation is the 24-25 school year.
Go ahead.
Referencing the screening that you're using, if this is implemented, what's the proposed threshold for retention?
So the proposed threshold in this current drafted policy is what's called well below, on a 5 achievement level scale. What Mississippi did back in 2013 is they used that lowest rung as well, of well below. And then as they saw gains in achievement, they came back several years later and legislatively changed that to be the bottom 2 levels for retention. So they in essence like upped the ante after a few years and made it the lowest 2 levels, but they began with well below. This legislation begins with well below as well.
So we're currently looking at the 2 lowest, and what we're proposing is the lowest, is that right?
Yes, which is where Mississippi began as well.
Thank you.
I have a question in regards to pupil progression in the SBLC. Are there any provisions for the SBLC to make any decisions in regards to, excuse me? Promotion.
So there
Will
are
this bill override a school system's autonomy? Or even with state requirements, Dr. Brown?
I think some of that is like an opinion on it, but there are good cause exemptions built in. And so there's a list, a student shall meet at least one of the following criteria to receive a good cause promotion, and then there's a list of them within the bill. There's also a section about the teacher submitting documentation to the principal that indicates that the promotion of the student is appropriate, but that documentation, according to this, is that that student meets one of those criteria for promotion still, so they would fall under that list.
Will this force parents or even educators to say, hey, I want a 504 plan for my child because there are issues? Will this
So
promote
this,
that?
the way the bill is written currently is that a parent would have the right to say, I want my child retained, even if the school and school system is saying they should be promoted because they have a good cause exemption, for instance. You know, my child is a student with a disability, so they have a good cause exemption, you know, they could be promoted. But the parent could still say, I want to retain them. This bill currently does not work the other way around.
I'm talking about a child that's having difficulties and knowing that there are provisions here, and I see this as a parent, and I say, well, I think I want to look at a plan for my child because I know what the future could hold. Because maybe he didn't have an effective teacher, and there were some deficits there with the child to have a 504 plan. So if you have a 504 plan, this is one of the provisions that allows a child to be promoted. Would this cause more of 504 plans? Would this cause more of whatever the provisions are? You follow?
I think it could potentially flag additional students for evaluation that could result
Absolutely.
in a plan.
Let me ask you something. For the current kids who are not meeting the criteria for proficiency in reading, whether it's through a screener or the LEAP test or whatever, off the top of your head, I realize you don't have it in front of you, and I don't even see Thomas sitting over there, but anyway, the kids that I find primarily who are not meeting the standard fall into these exception categories. They're English language learners, they're students with disabilities, or have a 504 plan that the accommodations are for reading. And Ms. Holloway's right, the number of parents who come and say, I want a 504 plan for my child, because I want testing accommodations and test read aloud and all this, to me, we try. My personal opinion is that their kids are going to be struggling readers, and when you put these 504 plans into effect too young before you try these other things, we cripple children as they go along because they haven't gone through that struggle of learning to read, you know, with that read aloud. But anyway, I'm not going to get into that part of it, but the piece of it where the number of kids that we have who are not scoring at level, I'd kind of like to know if somebody has the stats on how many are just regular education children who are falling short of the mark, or are the vast majority falling into 504 IEPs and English language learners. Because I do know we're having more and more schools into urgent intervention required because of the subgroups of special education and if you have a high population of ELL. And what's happening is those kids are never achieving proficiency at their grade level if they're in one, it seems like in one of these categories. Maybe ELL kids through EL can eventually become English proficient. But I'm just not sure if this is really going to address the problem.
Well, I do have a data point here to share,
Yeah.
and I'll just remind y'all that this is, this is me with a white card. I'm not here to argue for or against this bill. I'm here to
No,
provide
no.
information, so
We
I'm
can
not,
put this forward.
yeah, I'm not trying to, persuade y'all one way or another, but in providing information, what I do have is that we know about 31% of this year's third graders fell well below on our fall literacy screener, which is about 15,000 students. What I don't have yet, but what's a great point that we need to disaggregate, to your point, Superintendent, is how many of those students wouldn't fit into one of those good cause exemption
Right, that's right.
categories of that 31%. And again, those are children at the beginning of their third grade year. I'm super hopeful that they received great instruction throughout third grade and they wouldn't fall into that category by the end of their third grade year. But we do need to
You see what I'm
decide.
hearing from my people, my teachers, with the screeners of 3-minute maze, they call it little.
Well, I'll
That's the
also,
one we use.
yes, I'll also make note that currently, to Ms. Holloway's point, the screener being used right now, to remind you all, they have an option of one of those 4
Right.
statewide. And they are only doing a single component of the full battery of the screener. And so yes, for third grade, it's a maze. It takes 3 minutes. It doesn't really tell you a ton about a child's reading ability. Should this bill be approved and we then implement it as a Department of Education, we would have a screener with a full battery that gives much more information about that third grader's reading level. We would not be implementing this bill. It would not look at implementation like just that maze for third grade. It would be the full
I know, when
battery.
I look at the maze, and I'm saying,
Yes,
you know,
you
Exactly.
cannot
It's not
retain a
But
third
Jenna,
grade.
what are we doing K-2 prior to them getting to this third grade and this happens? to a
Lots
child?
of things.
I
That's
know.
all of my literacy presentations to you are all of those
With
things.
K-2 accountability, which, when will that cohort from K get into third grade for this to be?
So they would be there by
appropriate?
then. So the children who were first impacted by our literacy shifts, which to remind y'all, we've already seen a shift in our NAEP scores in fourth grade reading. And so those children who are impacted by the shifts that we've made in literacy in our state, these are those kids. They will have come up through K into this third grade band, and they've been impacted by, I think, the fruits of the state's labor around literacy. Also to note, with the individual reading plans, and you all asking like what happens for their intervention, those individual reading plans, you all already passed in policy. That's happening for these kids, should this bill pass, but it's already happening for them. So even if this bill doesn't pass, the K through third grade students performing below grade level on their literacy screener already have individual reading plans with time allotted for intervention and planned for, and parents are involved in those individual reading plans for all of these students already. That's already in our policy.
Okay, I don't want us to end up getting super bogged down, so we have a very long agenda. I think it's well noted that we have concerns on this bill and that we can continue talking with BESE members on this as we move through the process. So I have a couple priority bills, like I said, that I wanted to cover to bring up to you, and then I'm sure some of the members have specific questions about bills I want to get to. Thank you, Dr. Chesson. So the next bill that I want to bring up to your attention is under the school choice category. This one is going to make quite a splash as it starts being heard. This is House Bill 98 by Chairman of House Education, Lance Harris. This creates the Sunshine Scholarship Program. So this is a universal education savings account. So over the years, we've heard a lot about education savings accounts. How this works is,
Can you give us the bill number?
oh yes, I'm sorry, it's House Bill 98.
Okay.
House Bill 98, it's under the school choice category. This would allow, since it's universal, that means any student in in public school would be able to opt into an education savings account. At that point, the student would be able to pull down funds that would allow them to spend as the parents/students will within a certain category of educational options for them. They would be removed from the public system and they would be able to utilize these funds. This does not directly pull MFP funds. This is a separate allocation that would be made by the legislature because MFP funds cannot be used for the purpose of private schools. So this would be a separate allocation similar to how the scholarship program is currently run. So that's a separate pot of money that if you qualify for, you're able to pull down those funds and utilize them in the private space. This is not just for private school. It can be for tutoring services, homeschool services. There's a list of items that this could be used for. So that's the top line information on the bill. There is another one similar to this, which is House Bill 9 by Representative Butler. That bill, though, has a very narrow scope on it, which is just for students with exceptionalities that would be able to pull down these funds. And the calculation for how much a student gets is based on the MFP allocation that they would have received with the weights added. Any questions about these bills or comments on these bills?
I have one question on it, and this just pertains to Superintendent Brumley and your editorial endorsing these types of savings accounts. And so I'm just curious as to how that is supposed to work in our process of the department not advocating or taking positions on legislation. How does that editorial fit into that general tenor of how the department is supposed to be operating?
So for one, that letter to the editor did not endorse any particular bill. It endorsed a concept that I think was important, which is allowing families the opportunity to select the school that makes the most sense for them. It did not in any way reference a bill.
I know, but that's still like a little bit of it's semantics, right? I mean, I guess I just was.
I don't think so. I don't think it's semantics at all. Had I said I'm supporting this particular bill, then that would have been something. But instead, I'm saying I support a concept that families should be able to select the school that makes the most sense of them. And I'll tell you, I do have a concern that if other states, particularly southern states that are seeing much of a renaissance, have this option, and Louisiana doesn't have this option, whenever you start thinking about economic development engines within our state, they're trying to recruit to our state, and we don't have this as an option for companies, I do think it will put us at a competitive disadvantage.
Can you point me in the direction of evaluations that have been done of these types of savings accounts in those states that have shown that they are linked to increased educational outcomes?
Yeah, I mean, I think that depends on what the method of evaluation would look like and what you're trying to evaluate. That's going to be different from place to place based on how the bill is constructed. Even ESA proponents argue around the accountability piece. Some of them believe, absolutely no accountability. Some of them believe accountability that absolutely has to match what happens in the public school space. So, that particular spectrum is out there even among the proponents of education savings accounts.
I mean, I'm heartened that Representative Harris does have assessments for these students or their families that partake of the education savings account. They do have to take either the LEAP or some other reference test that the department will pick. But I would like, so regardless of the differences across the kinds of savings accounts, if you could point me in the direction of some evaluation research, regardless of type, that has shown that these are linked to better education outcomes, I would appreciate it. Because I've looked around and I haven't been able to find it. And I think in part it's a function of the fact that these things are so new, right? This is I don't want to say fad because that's not the right word, but it is a very recent development, and I am unaware of any evidence that points to this improving student outcomes. And so I don't think that we should support things just because other states are doing it if it can't be linked to best practices and evidence. And so I just have, just for the board's clarity, I have concerns about that.
You know, I have some of the same reservations, obviously, and if we're looking at accountability with these, I think if the state does move in this direction, the accountability should be the same accountability our students have, since it's a use of public funds. It should be the same assessments. There should be some studies done to see then what the effects would be when we're comparing the kids, that the educational attainment is the same. So the assessment piece I have a problem with, but I'm looking at this, I have a huge problem. Y'all look at page 3. Did anybody look at page 3 of this? Which is the public school choice page. Basically, what they're saying here is that there are no attendance boundaries, nothing. Go anywhere you want to go throughout the state of Louisiana, to any public school, either within your own district, or outside of your district. That the only caveat is if the school has capacity. Does everybody realize what this would necessarily mean within your own school district? That you would then say to every child who resides within your school district, oh, by the way, you can go to any school you want. Put in your preference or whatever, however you have to do it, if you read this. Right now, it is set up for if your child attends a DRNF school, that you can apply to go to a public school that has an A, B, or C destination, either within or outside of your school system. What this change does is let every child in the entire state choose any school they wish to go to, both inside and outside of your district. I have a huge problem with this. Anybody else would like to comment on this? I mean, you know, just think of your own individual school systems and parishes. So we're saying go to any school you want within your school district if it has capacity. So that is a major change. And I don't know if any local districts have even been consulted on this.
Wondered if the LHSAA is going to be.
Well, I can tell you, well, they won't be eligible to play ball, I guess. Forget the LHSAA, I'm more concerned with our own internal school systems. And
And to Doris's point about this, right, we worried quite a bit about parents being treated fairly in the transfer policy for failing schools, right? Kind of this trying to come up with a way of whether or not a school actually had access or had seats for that child. What exactly did that mean? And so we were worried even about how many requests or appeals we might be processing in just that. And so this would be opening that up to not just the DNF school appeals, but for every school, right?
Bus transportation.
yeah, there's so many, to wave your wand and say go without any input from the community itself. I have a community right now who is very focused on this particular issue. And if it's going to be okay, open season, tell me what school you'd like to go to of every school in the parish. I mean, this is good. This is not going to be doable, in my opinion, anywhere in the near future, or advantageous for local systems.
Okay, so thank you for those comments.
Well, I'd like to know how maybe some other people feel about this. But actually, I have to admit, I hadn't seen this before.
You talk about the ability to switch between schools?
Right, did you read page 3, Jim?
No.
We'll look at it. Before it was if you went to a DNF school, then you had the opportunity to apply to go to any A, B, or C school if they had the capacity, either within your own school system or outside.
And that failed once too.
No, that's in current law right now. What this does is takes out all the, if you're in a DNF school, this says that the parent or guardian of any child anywhere in any public school can go to any public school without regard to residence, school system, geographical boundary, or attendance zone if the school has capacity, it wipes out D or F schools. So you could have your, you know, any current A or B school, everybody wanting to go there, no attendance zones.
The current law restricted it to within school districts,
Yeah.
not across district line.
There had to
No,
be an
it is-
agreement that was made between the
An
two
MOU,
districts.
I guess.
An
So
MOU.
you go across
I don't
school
think there's
lines.
been any agreements.
I don't know that.
No.
Senator
You-
Nelson
wait.
passed
Current
that
law
bill.
says you can cross school
Yes.
lines, district lines,
Yes.
if the school you're going to has sufficient capacity.
And
So if I
the
live,
receiving district doesn't have any say at all
right,
in the
that's,
current law?
if you have capacity, you have no say, that's under current law. But it only applied to if you were in a D or an F school that you could do it. This says if you're in any school, it wipes out all the DF, the ABC, it doesn't matter. You could be in any school, say you're in Jefferson Parish. So all Jefferson Parish schools basically would have open enrollment. Every elementary, middle, or whatever, no attendance zones. So everybody, where do you want to go?
Did the department?
LaFour's,
assist-
Terrebonne,
Yeah.
same thing. Which
The
school would you like?
Department assist?
The department did not assist in this. We did not know that there was going to be a universal bill from the author. We only knew of HB 9 because we knew that would be refiled, which is the Representative Butler's bill. This particular one,
Yeah, I've
we
heard
did not
this.
have information.
Can they transfer at any time during the year? Does it say in here?
That looks like with the law, it just is removing the exceptions that Ms. Doris was talking about, the D or the F, like that's just what struck through. There's nothing added to that section. So it
So
would just be removing, so it doesn't say anything about
Ms.
that.
Holloway?
Do parents, I'm sorry, is the district responsible for transportation to outside the district? Which
So
brings
you
me
have-
to the point
They are
of,
not.
where brings me to your point about who has
Outside
the
the district.
capability,
but within the district. you're
access
responsible.
to transportation, to be able to transfer to a good school.
But whether you're responsible for transportation or not, if I'm in St. Tammany Parish, wherever, I can go to any school. I mean, I could bypass the B school I'm in, and I want to go to the C school. I mean, you would have to then have some mechanism where you have every parent saying, here's where I want to send my child to. And you're doing a major fruit basket turnover.
Well, in regards to transportation, if they don't have bus services, which I doubt they'll have, from one district to the other, then you're hindering children who don't have that opportunity for transportation too. Is another, I'm looking at that. Okay, just questioning how all this works.
What does this 98 say about accountability?
For accountability, let's see what's in my.
Yeah.
I don't think see anything yet.
That's what I'm talking about, what this district is. It's a state.
So we can follow up later.
Yeah, we can follow
I know we
up.
have a lot
I
to
need
do.
Yeah, I need to dig into it to see specifically
Okay.
about the company. I know
But it's
that there
certainly
are
one,
assessments.
certainly one flag for us to
You
look
do
at more
have it.
closely.
It's in there, I'm being told.
Yes, it's in our package, I just
Okay.
haven't read the packet, I just got it.
Yeah.
Question.
Okay, yes, Mr. Garvey?
Mr. Melanson, I thought I heard recently that there was some sort of national group that did a study, this is to Ms. Belinda's point, about a study of any studies. I thought there was a study done by some national group, national recognized group that showed that there were significant beneficial results showing up in both for the student and for the schools.
That is true, Mr. Garvey.
Do you remember what national group it was?
I can't remember off the top of my head, but I have read it, and I'm going to make it available to Dr. Davis.
I would appreciate that, thank you. I'll send it to everybody if he doesn't send it to all of them.
Can we get this clarified? What stops a district from allowing open boundaries?
Nothing.
None.
No,
So
no statute.
you don't need
So
a
the
law.
legal say nothing.
But this is
No,
across
district.
district lines,
This
which
is
is
crossing
different.
district lines.
But another question, how much money goes with the student if they cross district lines? Is it the full MFP or just?
It's the state share. I don't think there's a provision that would allow the local share to go with the districts across state lines. I'm looking at Beth right now to see if Beth can.
$400.
Is that what Nelson's bill that established the ability to cross district lines says? Because I thought that it was, you took your MFP with you. Am I wrong on that? So this was a long time ago.
Beth, can you come up for a second?
Yeah, if a student decides to go to another school, chooses to go to another school under the current law, and crosses district lines, how much money does the receiving district get? Is it the full MFP or just the state portion of the MFP?
Currently, if the process is there's an agreement between the two districts and the student is enrolled in the receiving
Well,
district,
but they're saying that there doesn't have to be an agreement between the districts under the current statutes.
right, and that happens because as long as the original home district relinquishes that child and does not count them, and that child is enrolled in the receiving district for whatever reason, then they get whatever the MFP is for that district in which they're enrolled. That happens occasionally.
But not a local portion.
Well, they're getting the
The-
benefits of the local portion for the school system in which they're enrolled. Yes, they benefit in that way. They don't
But they get no
carry,
additional local money just
They
because
don't
the student.
right, they don't
Switch.
carry the local money with them from the school system that they left. There is no transition there unless there is an agreement between the two districts that some sort of money is exchanged.
Okay, now, along those lines, the statute that's in place now requires that there be capacity in the receiving school district. That would mean an open seat. What is the additional cost to that district to have a student from another district come in and sit in that seat? You don't have to hire an extra teacher, I don't imagine. So what would the extra cost be? Close to zero?
Depends on depends on the child and what his needs are. If he's a child with an exceptionality or an English, if it's a child that has needs above what a regular classroom teacher.
Let's say
would
the
get.
average child.
Well,
What would the extra cost be to a
Right.
school system that has capacity?
I don't know that there would be any cost, any additional cost, because just as they lose students in a class of 30 and you lose 2, there's no cost reduction there. And so if you accept a child, again, it would need to be a regular ed student who didn't need some exceptional services that were very expensive. There may not be any additional cost. But whatever that child, whoever the child is, they'll count that student in their counts, and then the MFP will react to that and allocate money based on that student's characteristics.
So it sounds to me it's easily possible that they could get more money from the state portion of the MFP than what it would cost additionally for an extra child, for an average child to switch across district lines.
I don't know that that would be true. It could be if the districts have way more, if they're getting way more from the MFP because of their allocation, that receiving district would get the same amount they would for that child had they always been there. So like if EBR, or let's say Acadia has a child that wants to switch. They no longer attend Acadia, they go to Beauregard. Acadia was getting $4,000 from the MFP for that child, but when they switch to Beauregard, Beauregard's getting $4,100 per child. They become a Beauregard child at that point and they get whatever Beauregard's entitled to.
Thank you.
Okay, I think we have significant thoughts on this one. Once again, I don't want to get completely bogged down, but I know this is important conversations that we're having, we will continue to have. This bill will change as it goes through the process, but I really appreciate the concerns that are brought up, and we have notes of them, and I'm sure officers have also heard the comments that have been made. It's time.
I think it would be a good time to go back to what you talked about earlier relative to our process. And I know there's something about a schedule coming out tomorrow for next week. This is a House bill that we're looking at?
Yes, it's House Bill review.
Okay, and so if it's coming up next week, we should know that tomorrow.
Tomorrow, well,
Okay.
you'll know the committee date tomorrow. You'll know the tentative schedule. You will not know what's on the agenda. They would probably try to get that out, earlier in the week, if so, but they won't make determinations on that until the committee schedule is determined.
Okay,
So we would still have some time to be able to talk through this.
okay, and study it individually and,
Yes,
collect
so you
comments,
have all the
okay.
information in front of you now to look at it yourself. You have the department staff and our legal staff to also assist in potential interpretation of what it means. But we don't know what's on that agenda until it gets a little closer. We may not even meet on the first week of session. We don't know.
okay, well, that would give us more time to read on
It
it.
sure
Thank
would.
you, sir.
And this is for a public student going to a non-public school, is that?
That's for the ESA portion.
Okay.
But there's a portion that
There's a
is
portion
a
in there
public
that does
student
not
going to
specifically
another
work.
public school too.
Yeah.
Okay.
There's a lot in it.
Yeah.
There's a lot.
Participating school, yeah.
Mr. Garvey?
Another question. Do you know why, this is Mr. Harris's bill? that we're
Yeah,
talking
Chairman
about?
Harris.
Why he would combine two issues into one bill instead of using two different bills?
I have not talked to him yet about this. Like I said, we're still uncovering a lot in the legislation and working through it. But it's a conversation we can have with him. There may be a specific reason why.
Or maybe because everybody only has 5 bills.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But it sounds like Mr. Representative Hill might have a spare bill now if he were to let
Potentially.
that other
But actually,
representative run with it.
but actually it's too late because pre-filing has happened and it would have to be specifically germane what's already there for it to be shelved.
It can't be,
It would have to be
Shelved.
germane. It would have to be amending the same section of law as what's currently considered change.
thank you.
Okay, what's
Ethan,
next?
well, I wanted to ask
Oh, sorry.
Ethan, last year there were 6, 7,
There were.
8 ESA bills.
There were 7.
And 2 of them landed on the governor's desk, he vetoed
Yes.
them both. But this board supported all of them, correct?
That is correct.
Okay, what's next?
So the next item that I wanted to discuss was on school safety, House Bill 213 by Representative Brass dealing with public records. This exempts surveillance and security video of the inside or of covering the area immediately surrounding a building owned, operated, or maintained by a public school board or charter school from the public records law. So school safety, they've done this with airports and other ones. The reason why I'm bringing this one up as a bill that we want to discuss, there is some concern around the cameras in classrooms.
Okay,
for-
bill number,
Oh,
sorry.
House Bill 213 by Representative Brass. 213. It's on your turn.
Is it in our packets? No. Okay, on our tracker under which content area?
It's under schools, actually school safety is probably missing for your tracker, but it would technically fall under school choice because the header got deleted in the process. But it's 213, Mr. Miller had made me aware of that.
Okay, I see it,
Okay.
okay, got
We
it.
can
So
get you
Brass
an
Public
update.
Records.
Yes,
Got it.
Brass Public Records. The reason why I'm bringing this up is because last year, if you remember, they did the the cameras in special education classrooms, which also required video surveillance within those self-contained classrooms. It was only allowed to be viewable by 3 people. It is currently not part of public records request. It's not allowed. There has been some concern that people think that this is what that bill is trying to undo or to hide. That is not the case. This is a completely separate section of law that it's dealing with, and so this is just codifying in law, which is already not allowed.
This bill actually is a result of the situation in my school district,
Really?
and that's why this was filed. There was a request by a former employee under the public records law for us for video surveillance of something within our school building. We denied that public request because we said that under the current law, this video surveillance within schools falls under the security plans. Because if Joe Blow off the street could come in and say, I would like 2 weeks of video surveillance for ABC Elementary School, of all your halls, all your video cameras that you have inside your school building. And if it's under public records request, you can't ask them why you want it, you have to give it to them. And with I think this is feeding right into all the school safety issues. People can take that and map out a floor plan of your school. If you have resource officers, they can see when the resource officers are passing at a certain time. And right now, currently under the law, the blueprints of your buildings are exempted from public records requests and all of these other security plans. But the video is not technically mentioned in it. So we have been to district court where we have won that it is not a public record, through an appeals court, and potentially even higher at this point. So to correct this situation, that's why this bill is passed. So security, now a parent has a right to a child's educational record. And if there's video of that child in that classroom and that's part of his educational record or something, that parent has a right to see that. Okay, this is a totally different situation. This is anybody off the street right now, some people think they can go in and say, give me the video surveillance of these hallways for this period of time, for a month maybe. And you can't tell them no, they think. So that's why this legislation is being proposed. So I've asked everybody to please support this. This is real security implications in schools.
Thank you so much for the background on that. The reason why I wanted to bring that up is because there was concern among some of the advocate groups out there around the special education cameras, and I have shared with them that this is not impeding on that at all. So I wanted to make sure I brought it before y'all so that if they are listening right now, that they can hear the reasoning why they're doing this.
Are there any other laws like this, Superintendent Boche, that you would like to share with us?
Well, if
Get that off.
Ethan hadn't brought it up, I was going to bring this one up.
Okay.
This is a direct result of a public records request in my school district
Right.
for video surveillance in one of our buildings. And we denied it under the public records request because we didn't feel, we felt that was part of our security plans.
All right.
It had nothing to
members-
do with the child. This was an adult
Right.
situation.
Members, do any of you all have any bills that are priority that you're supporting and we should know about? Okay. What's next?
All right, so the last one that I wanted to bring up with y'all was just something from earlier in the filing process that happened. So we all know what happened in the NFL when the player had a cardiac event on the field. One of those things that legislators came to us asking a lot of information about. This is Senate Bill 12. It's on the last section of your tracker. It's by Senator Fields, Public Health, and it requires an automated external defibrillator on the premises of all educational institutions, and it sponsored athletic events. So it was a popular thing at that point, and it still is really important. Something to note is that funding for this has been included in the governor's budget, I understand. So it would not be an unfunded mandate at that point. But I just want to bring that up for awareness that that is one of the student well-being and health topics that was really hot for a while. Outside of that, I will turn it over to y'all if you have any questions about specific legislation that I did not cover, because there's a lot. And happy to answer any questions that we know of to this point.
Mr. Rock?
Even on House Bill 282 by Green, schools food program provides for free breakfast and lunch for public school students. Any possibility that non-public schools be added to that?
I do not believe it includes non-public schools right now. There's a possibility it could. But I don't have that information yet because I've not spoken to the author specifically about non-publics and that.
It
does not include legal.
non-public.
It does not include non-publics at this point.
non-publics at this point in time.
Thank you.
Where would the funding come from?
It's the $1 million question. It would probably come from the state. The state would have to fund that. So that would be an increase in the Department of Education budget annually.
Do you have your estimate for that one yet?
We do have an estimate,
It's 33 million.
33 million,
It may be closer to 40 million.
$40 million, there we go. So these are some early estimates that we had to provide to the fiscal office, but it'd be about 40 million a year, I'm understanding.
I would like for you to send us a breakdown of all the fiscal estimates that you've provided. I think that would be
So
helpful.
the final fiscal note are the ones that we provided to the fiscal office. Remember, there's a little difference. So the fiscal office takes into account other agencies for a total cost.
Yes.
The department is just a small portion of that. So once the final fiscal note is attached to a bill, it's put on that legislative website through that link that's in these documents. So you can pull it. It updates frequently. Because
Okay.
as a bill changes, the cost a lot of times change also. So that's the fluid process. A lot
So
of
are
it's
the ones that we have in our packet, is there, are most of them updated fiscal notes?
a lot of them, because session has not started yet, fiscal notes have not been posted for all of them. They will be posted as the session begins, so.
So let's just start with what you've already provided. I don't want you to go and do a whole bunch of other work, but if that's work that you've already provided, it would be helpful for us to know, right?
Yeah,
Yeah.
but it will only be our portion, so that will not take into
Yeah.
consideration any other
Just
agency.
make sure you note that on what you send to us. I think that would be helpful.
I can link that into the tracking document.
Oh, even better. Yes, if it's all in one
But
place.
like I said, we would switch those out with the official fiscal note, because there's a lot of times where we send a
We
fiscal
say
note,
zero,
and
but
they
it would be a
then
big
ask
cost to
questions,
district.
and then they alter it from
Yeah.
our original. So
Well,
I
and if you just make sure the column header notes that piece, right?
Yeah.
That
It's not
it's
official.
your estimate, an LDE estimate compared to a final summative amount. Okay.
Yes, ma'am.
Board members, yes, Dr. Davis.
I have a question about House Bill 164 by Representative Cox that lowers the ACT score for TOPS Tech. So I have a couple of questions, and I don't know that you'll be able to answer them, but I do know that we're supposed to be doing a better job sharing information between us and the Board of Regents regarding enrollment of our high school graduates. And so in light of that, I would like to know if it's possible to know what percentage of ACT scores of 17 enroll in college by TOPS Tech status? And then what is the percentage of ACT scores of 15 and 16 currently enroll in community college? And then, and what is the Board of Regents' stance on this particular piece of legislation? And do they have any estimates of the anticipated increase in credentials to help us meet our goal of 60% of our population having some post-high school credential?
As far as the Board of Regents, can't speak for them right now. I have not discussed this bill with them yet. I'm sure they're going through the same process of analyzing these bills and getting a point on it. I do have numbers for graduating seniors with the 17, 16, and 15 as of 3/24/23, but it's not to enroll in post-secondary, but I do have the numbers of those if you would like them.
Superintendent Brumley, have we started kind of the process of formalizing? I mean, I know we're supposed to be having data sharing agreements with the Board of Regents to try to better track the kind of success of high school graduates as they leave and enroll in post-secondary education. So do you think it would even be possible to get those numbers yet?
I would have to get back with you on that,
Okay.
Dr. Davis.
Because I think it would be important for us to have those numbers to help us figure out whether or not
Yeah.
we think that this is something as a board we should consider.
We do have Thomas in the room if you'd like to ask him, but I don't want
No,
to
that's
get bogged down.
That's okay, yeah, no, I mean, if you
Okay.
can just get it to me later.
Yeah,
that'd be
we'll
great.
take note of that, thank you.
Members, do you have any other bills of interest that you would like to discuss before we move into the principals?
I do, I'm sorry.
That's okay.
I'll even skip some of them. So I would just like to point out that around Senator Bowie's POD legislation, Senate Bill 71, that pertains to making sure that they are not charging tuition. I would just like to say that now that I know that resolutions can happen throughout the session, that I may look into pursuing a resolution surrounding asking the department to provide information to the legislature surrounding enrollment in pods. And this is in particular as a result of my attempts to find out the demographic breakdown in terms of economically disadvantaged English as a second language learners and kids with IEPs, as well as race and ethnicity surrounding pod kids that we currently have in our state. And the department does not currently break down the data that way, so I did a public records request, and the organization that has the data that I asked for is trying to charge me $400 to get that information on the basic demographics of kids that are in pods. And so I think that this is an area that we need to be thinking about in light of the fact that we don't know this information. Letter grades are associated with economically disadvantaged status, right? If you look at a correlation between our test scores and that statistic, it is very high. And I am worried that we have the potential to see charter schools use pods, or even public schools for that matter, especially if we're allowed to just go wherever in the state, inflate letter grades, their SPS scores with those, and that allows charter schools in particular to start adding schools without having to go forward to BESE, right? And so I think that there are very real concerns here that we haven't been addressed, or that we have not addressed, and that need to be talked about by the board.
Mr. Garvey?
Yeah, I missed the part about inflating test scores or inflating SPS scores, I guess. How would that work?
So my concern is that it's possible to have low-income children in a brick-and-mortar school scoring an SPS score of a D. But if you are with your pods targeting middle and upper income students in other areas, their test scores at the pods are going to inflate your overall letter grade score. And if you are an LEA that has multiple charter schools and you get to a certain letter grade overall, you are allowed to expand your portfolio of schools because you have reached a certain letter grade status. And so in my mind, it's disingenuous to parents, right, who are going to look at that school's report card and say, hey, my child is attending a B-rated school, when the reality is that the SPS score for the children in the brick and mortar school could be a D or an F, and the pod students be an A. And so that you are masking educational attainment because you're not breaking it down by the location of the student.
Has that happened? Has that happened?
Well, if you are you asking me?
Yeah.
So currently, our accountability system does not break it down by brick and mortar or by pod status. And all I know is that the school that has pods affiliated with it right now, their economically disadvantaged numbers have gone from like 85% economically disadvantaged to 50% economically disadvantaged with the advent of pods.
Just a question for clarification for student information. I don't have any learning pods, so I don't know. Do you designate
Do you need some?
that in student?
You may have them in this building.
And you might
I
not
don't
know.
know.
Are you sure you don't have? That's right.
I need to go find some of those kids. Anyway, no, I guess my question is in the student information system is, do we designate kids that are in learning pods?
We do not. I'm seeing
Okay. We don't.
Thomas in the back. He's saying, no, we do not.
So we have no way of knowing which kids are enrolled in learning pods and which kids are not enrolled in learning pods?
Thomas, can you come forward, please?
You're saying, yes, we don't. Or, yes, we do. I don't know.
He's coming to clarify.
I just don't understand why we can't ask. Can't we make a policy asking?
Ethan. How much you made it for?
I did. We gotta get every assistant superintendent at some point.
That's great. So we do not collect whether the student is in a learning pod or in the brick and mortar school in our student information system currently. As to whether or not we could move policy to identify those students, that is a question that we would probably have to refer to legal on the different collection of information. The last piece that I would say is that I believe under the law, they are classified as being students of that school. So the school's letter grade would be all of the students who are enrolled in that school, which those students are.
And you have subgroups too.
That's correct.
And that is true that they're students in the school, even though they might be learning from a completely different medium, different curriculum, some online, some using the Tier 1 curriculum, right? And so I understand that under the law right now, they are the same school, but I think that does not preclude us from asking about varying basic demographics across the two mechanisms of education that are inside that single building.
So my site code, right, it's just a school site code, not a location code. That's what you're saying. So I can have a school here, but a pod 100 miles away or something, and it would still have the same site code in your system, right?
I believe that's what the law says about the learning pods.
Question. Thomas, from a similar perspective, if a school has some classes that are honors classes or no, within a school, you have some classes that are not honors and some classes that are honors. And if the honors students are getting better grades than the non-honors students, we don't break out the school's letter grades and show what the honors students are doing versus what the regular students are doing, so that parents know that if they sign up their child for that school for non-honors, that it's going to be a lower graded type of a situation. We don't break those out.
You're correct.
Do we?
You're correct.
Thank you.
Same with magnet schools or any other schools, there's no differentiation.
If the magnet school is its own school, but if there's a magnet inside of the school, a program inside of the school, all of those scores are going into the overall school score.
I could have a magnet school
Yeah, same thing.
3 miles away associated with my school if I wanted to, all along.
Mm-hmm.
And districts could have done.
If districts can do this too.
Districts were actually able to do this before this law passed,
Districts were told we couldn't do this years ago, because some school systems tried to do that.
which is why we sought to clarify.
Which is what
the
they
law.
put was in it, said you can't do that, that's why I'm bringing this up now. Like, so you're telling me now I could probably go put one in there
You
and
could
call
do
it
a
a
side
learning
ranking.
pod and separate my kids if I wanted to.
Yes.
You invite us to a ribbon cutting?
I'm not asking, I'm just saying, I mean, those things could happen. Because we were told, Ms. Jackson was told I couldn't do that years ago.
Magnet
I'm
pod.
going way back. Diane Rousseau.
Not Diane Rousseau?
Way back.
All right, members, questions about any other bills that you would like to ask now? Yes, ma'am.
We've already talked about this one a lot, it's the Associate Educator Program bill, but I wonder if we should not put some thought into thinking about an expiration date, as Mr. Garvey thought, so we would have to come back or ask the legislature to approve 5 years from now that this was a good idea. And then in light of the thought of having an expiration date on it, should the piece of legislation require that the department collect data that would allow us to look at education outcomes for the kids that are in classes that are being taught by the associate's degree teachers so that we could look to see, so we could evaluate the effectiveness of the program in case we were going to have a sunset provision, and then at least we would have data then that would allow us to know, to make an informed decision, or the legislature would have data to make an informed decision.
This is thoughts to consider as you interact with the authors of the bill.
Thank you.
So I think for some of the things that you're talking about, it would take working with the authors of the bill, but I think there's other things that we could do in policy if this bill passes.
Yeah,
So I
'cause you
think
would-
it's it might be an either or for some of the things that you're talking about. I think especially connected to the evaluation of studying it for years to come. It's-
Belinda, while Shane is here, if you want to ask about the teacher observations, remember, if they transfer.
I think you had stepped out.
Oh, I did.
Ms.
I'm
Davis,
sorry. Yeah, she stepped
no, Ms. Davis had stepped out, and we were talking about the associate teacher piece, and I think there was a specific question that they had for you, but we knew we were coming back to it.
And so it's about the first certification bill that tries to get at the idea that
HB 191.
191.
Right, so they're coming from parochial schools and whether or not they have their evaluations and how those count. And so I know that we've had discussions about teachers that are missing those evaluations either because they're coming from a parochial school, because they were taking maybe maternity leave, or just taking a break from the profession to stay home with their children, or they're coming from a school that did not conduct their evaluation. So this bill does not address those issues. And so I guess one of my concerns is we have discussed the idea of changing the language so that you don't get your certification if your evaluations deem that you are ineffective, and that would take away the idea that you are dinging a mom that stayed home with her kids, right? And then she did not have an evaluation that says she's effective, and so that it flips it so that she is not having to do provisional certification because she chose to stay home with her kids. So before that, right, she has an evaluation that shows that she was effective, she took those years off, so now she doesn't have the 3 years of data. Why wouldn't we say if she has evaluations that label her ineffective, or that they do not get the certification? Does that make sense? It's been a long day, so I may not be as clear as
So I'm
And we know
information
you
that-
can freeze, but that's
Yeah.
more work for the certification office. Not everybody knows about that.
Yeah.
And it's more
And
work
if
for
we're opening
teachers.
this up to get more teachers in the classroom, that's for our toolbox, then why do we want to hinder teachers? And put this on the back of a certification appeals council, whose 40% of their reviews have to deal with this issue.
I'm going to restate this just to see that I understand. So the law currently is you have to have 3 successful, I'll use the word effective evaluations. I think it's the word effective anyway. So 3 effective evaluations. But someone who may step out, whether that be for family purposes or to go teach it in non-public or for whatever reason, it's their certification is in jeopardy because they're not showing up to get those effectives. So what you're talking about is if it said ineffective, then it would get at the spirit of the law, which is we don't want teachers who are ineffective, right? So get at the spirit of it, but it wouldn't be as cumbersome from a paperwork process. Is that what you're saying?
Right, and so because the absence of the evaluation itself would not prevent the certification, it would be the presence of an ineffective evaluation.
Because you need 3.
3
highly
effective.
3
Or 3, if you have 3 ineffective, so not just 1, you have to have 3 ineffectives, I think.
Right.
To not be renewed.
Okay, do you know if this was talked about at this level of detail with the author of this bill?
We have not talked to the author of the bill about this specific issue. We have
Okay.
talked about it as a department and with our certification team in detail. And while that is a fix that we could do, there do have some unintended consequences that could also happen with that. So we just want to make sure that we are talking to stakeholders in this also and educators about it across the board, because this bill does fix the parochial issue. And we do have Christy here who can share some of the issue and some of the fixes that we have currently. Representative, sorry, I voted you.
I don't know if it's.
I don't know,
I
right?
haven't watched the words.
It's getting late. What Dr. Davis was talking about with the mom at home, like that is covered in policy, that is something that we take care of. But when it comes to that specific issue of flipping it from effective to not having 3
Well, it's not
unaffected.
flipping it, it's already in there.
Yeah,
So it says it in both places.
I think what we're still missing though is the fact that if the evaluation was not completed, that is.
That's a problem anyway,
Yeah.
of course, I mean, a small.
But that's
problem.
not, like, not completing an evaluation is not an individual teacher problem, that's a system problem. So I would like to hear more about the unintended consequences. Who's the staff
that
person
was-
who could
I
talk us
think it's
through
going
that?
to be that they don't evaluate the teacher,
Christy,
but that
could you come
it's
up
still
with this?
required that districts evaluate the teacher. I mean, we're not removing that requirement.
I just didn't think it was optional that I not evaluate teachers. I mean,
It's
just like,
It's not optional.
Changing it is
not
not
optional.
going to make
It's
it.
not optional, but what happens a lot of times is teachers go out in March or whatever, they have a baby. They don't come back until the next school year. You can't complete that year's evaluation, so you can't do one for the year in which they've missed 3 months of school because of the regulation. So that year is shot. So if you're on a level 2 and you need 3 out of 3 to go to a level 3, then we have to what, either extend it a year or do whatever it is we have to do.
So currently, level 2 is your average certificate. It's not the level 1, which is 3 years. The level 1 can be extended for 2 years. So it eventually could have 5 years. You need 3 out of the 5s. The level 2 has a 5-year validity, and you need 3 effective evaluations within that 5-year validity. And to the point earlier this year, earlier today, we do have provisions in policy that allow for people that leave early in the year, go take care of parents or children, maternity leave, all of those things. We have options in policy to preserve the validity of that educator. What this bill is attempting to do is some of the problems that we have are when teachers want to change the location in which they're teaching. They go from public to non-public or back and forth. Current law and policy requires that if there is a law or a policy in place that an educator in a non-public system cannot meet the requirements to maintain their certification, then we have to provide an additional option, some other alternative, which the board decided many years ago was a different certificate. So what this bill is trying to do, among several things, is to prevent educators from having to maintain more than one certificate. Essentially, it's going to allow you all, provided you adopt policy that we're anticipating will follow this if this is adopted, to allow us to use evaluations. If they're in the non-public setting, we would use the local evaluation. If they're in the public setting, we would use the Compass evaluation. And so it would negate the need for multiple certificates, and when educators move around, it would remove some of those barriers to certification. Now, as far as some of the other unintended consequences about having no evaluation done, there's a law in place right now that requires school systems to evaluate teachers, and there are some that are currently not doing, and yes, it is a school or a school system issue, and it's not the educator issue. But we foresee that if we have this problem now and we remove the requirement to have the evaluations in the way that you're mentioning, that it would encourage school systems to continue to not evaluate their teachers. And so it may not solve the issue, but create another one.
I guess my thought on that, though, is that you're making something that is not the teacher's fault. It's their consequence, right? And so, I mean, I understand what you're saying, but this is another issue. This is another area where we have policy in place that says you have to do something, and there are no consequences when they don't do it. And right now, the only consequence when they don't do it is borne by the teacher.
Correct.
And that's who we have a shortage of right now.
Correct, and we're trying to address that as well. We brought some information to you all in the past several BESE meetings about the letters of notification that we're going to provide to school systems when we determine that an educator had to go to the appeals meeting because it was the fault of a school system. We've done some intense collaboration with our Compass team before we determine which school systems will be getting these letters of notification, so that there is some sort of consequence per se for the school systems that are not evaluating. We're thinking that it's a possibility that sometimes it may not be, the school system may not be aware of the issues. It may be a school level problem or, a specific administrator problem. And so we're hoping that these letters plus the annual report that we provide to you all that indicates these are the school systems that have not been evaluating will help to reduce the amount of times that educators see this. I would imagine, depending on what your desire is, there could be other consequences per se for school systems, but that's up to you all and not us.
So, the question about if the statute was changed to where it would be the 3 ineffectives is when there would be the issue. So your concern is that an unintended consequence of that is there would be more issues with people not being evaluated.
So
Is that, I just want to make sure that I understand, is that the unintended consequence you
Sure.
articulated?
Yes.
And do you have any others, or is that the only one?
That was one of the biggest ones that was discussed when we kind of proposed this to some stakeholders. And then it was decided that we wouldn't move forward with that possible change. And so we kind of discontinued those conversations.
And then what does that do from you on a paperwork standpoint, right? Because I think an unintended consequence of all of these changes, like how certification moved away from the PD hours and those types of things to the evaluation, I think an unintended consequence of that was the backlog that has been created in the teacher certification. And we have lots of consequences of that backlog. So I guess I'm curious about if we would make this shift, if that helps on a paperwork standpoint, because the backlog is something that continues to come up. It's the only way a lot of teachers really engage with the Department of Education. And as I go out and I just feel, one of my main purposes in life is to get more people to be teachers. And I'm recruiting them in, but then I'm setting them up to wait in a line. Like, I just feel like taking care of that would help in a big way, and I'm just wondering if there's not something else we could put in relative to the systems not evaluating, right? Like, if principals are not evaluating their teachers, then maybe that needs to be showing up in the principal's evaluation. So, like, there might be other safeguards that we could put in place to deal with the issue that you're talking about.
Absolutely. A couple of things. When we had CLUs, the same amount of paperwork was still required. It was still the same renewal period. I don't necessarily think that the backlog is a product of the evaluation piece being changed. The renewal period was the same. There was similar paperwork that needed to happen. I think part of the backlog, and we've discussed this, and Dr. Brumley has mentioned it before, towards the Senate Education Committee, it's multifold over many years. It didn't happen overnight. The department staff was cut in half many years ago. The workload has increased. We're in, I guess you'd say, the great resignation. There's a lot of turnover at the school system, so there's a lot more applications that are being submitted because the turnover is there. The other piece about the question about the backlog and the paperwork and this particular piece of legislation, a lot of what we see right now are applications to swap from one certificate to another. So we think this change allowing us to use the evaluation type appropriate to the setting in which they're in will reduce the number of applications that we see. So we think that will help here in reducing the backlog as well. Another thing about the backlog is there are 2 big rocks that we have to move and that we are working on is increasing and improving our technology, and we are working on building that, and increasing our staffing capacity. We're doing that as well. It's just not an overnight process. But we think this legislation will definitely help reduce the number of applications that we receive.
Are we at all looking into, like we had briefly spoken about, I think in one of the meetings, maybe, Superintendent Brumley could address this, at looking at how effective this level 1, 2, and 3 and such has been, and if the whole process maybe needs to be overhauled, because is it achieving what we wanted or intended it to achieve? And is it more, requiring more resources that are not necessarily effective in terms of outcomes?
For Dr. Chasson earlier, when she said that might be a matter of opinion.
Well, it might be, but I'd like your opinion on
Yeah,
that.
I mean,
Because
look,
I
I
think we're
think
turning
that-
over so much of this stuff, and I'm not sure if it's eliminating, the whole point was to make teachers better trained and prepared, to make sure that ineffective teachers were no longer with us, and I was just kind of wondering how much of that really has happened,
Yeah.
you know?
I know that our applications have certainly gone up over 10 years from 20,000 to 40,000, but at the same time, we still remain with shortages of teachers in our schools. One thing that Christy didn't mention around the applications that are still in the queue with certification is that less, what is it, Christy, probably 30 or 40 of them in total are people who want to be entry-level teachers. So the majority of those in the queue are renewals or add-on certifications. And there's been tremendous progress made in this over the last several months. But at the same time, we feel like there is some level of over-regulation with all of this. And that's part of some of the legislation that I think that we have to continue to look at. Because it's, again, a department that was cut in half, applications that have doubled. And so we're trying to deregulate some of that in a sensible way, but we're also exploring technology fixes that can make it better as well. So it's like many things that have to go into this.
Right, but if it was a really good process, and we thought that this process made better teachers, and the outcomes were what we wanted, I'm just not, from our local perspective, I'm not seeing, we're processing more and more of these renewals and all these different things we have to do. And I don't see it as making my workforce more effective. And from the state level, a bit about double the applications, half the staff. To me, I don't want to just increase staff on something that may not be as critical as putting the resources and the money elsewhere into student achievement. So,
And I think we agree, and that's, we're trying to tackle it from a number of different areas, but even like the applications we've been receiving over the last few months, like we have been saying, we went from 20,000 applications to 40,000 applications over a 10-year period. So that was the original number we had been using, but recently, I think we would have to say we're going to be over 50,000 applications this year, because we've been getting about 1,000 a week. And it's not just K-12, because we add in early care, and then you add in the non-public, and you add in substitute teaching and all those different things. And it's just like really added bureaucracy to this whole process. So I agree with you. We need to continue to look for streamlining.
well, with the few
Without just throwing
resources
more
we
money.
have, maybe we can look at that whole process.
Do you know how many certificates haven't been renewed due to ineffectiveness?
Excuse me?
Do you know how many certificates in the history of this?
How many?
One.
One. That's my whole point.
So is it achieving?
Is it
purpose?
achieving the outcome we wanted it to achieve on the state level? I don't think so. I think at the local level, when you have ineffective teachers, you're counseling them out or removing them before you're ever talking about renewing certificates. So the state process of all of these certificate renewals and what you need to do and what these people have to constantly check, it's not providing the outcomes that, in my opinion anyway, from what I see, the outcomes it was intended to provide. So one teacher in 12 years, we did this in 2012 or something. So in all these years, one teacher has been removed from the profession because of this.
Mr. Rock?
Well, just in your talking with teacher lieutenants, do they have the same situation with certification like we have over the years? Just in my opinion, of course, I've been around 10 years. So that's, long time ago. But back in the day, to me, certification was a much simpler process than it is today. I recall when I finished college in 1971, And I got my, what was that back then, type B, I guess it was at that point. And then we went from A to B, and then ultimately you're permanent. And but it wasn't as complex, in my opinion, as it is today. And I just wondered, as you, discuss with your other colleagues around the country, do they have the same complications, if you will, in the certification?
I think it varies place to place. I mean, there's not some places, certainly it's less restrictive than ours. Some places look more similar to us. But it's a lot. I mean, Christy will tell you, I push back on her about this sometimes, but, I have to trust her as the expert here. She'll tell me she left. I sent it back to her.
She's giving you a message.
Yeah. She'll tell you it takes her a year to train a certification person, because of all the different complexities. It takes her a year to train someone. And so even with some of the part-time work that we've been employing, we're having them look at a specific type of evaluation and that only because, like to her point, because of all the different rules that have been created over the last decade, whether it's BESE policy or legislative, it's taking her a year to train one person to be a certification specialist.
And I will say that when it comes to the evaluation discussion that we were having a little bit ago, M. Cooper and our teaching and learning team on Teacher Prep is really they're doing a comprehensive study currently of all that. So they're going to be looking into a new evaluation system and the way that it affects it, which may come with a package of bills to change a lot of this. So they're studying this right now. So I just wanted to make sure that I share that with you all as well.
And we've cut that overall number in half over the last, 3 or 4 months in the queue.
So I think we can go on to the principal's documents, members. Yes, Dr. Davis.
This is the last one, I promise. So
I
this
think you
is,
said that 3 months ago.
so this is House Bill 81, which is the pronouns bill. And so I would just like to say that if this piece of legislation passes, in light of what we know about adverse childhood experiences, the effects of bullying in schools, the potential for discipline consequences if the child does not answer when a teacher does not address them by the name that the child and the parents have asked for them to be called, that we think seriously about policy guidance at the state level that would require districts to engage in, if the parent asks, that child be removed from that teacher's classroom. Because I am concerned about the social and emotional well-being of the students that may be or will be adversely affected by this piece of legislation if it passes.
Thank you. Members, any others? Okay, I'm going to move us to our principal's document. And we'd like to go through each of these members. So this is you see all of the bills on the watch list. You know that there are even more that were filed. And that as officers, we will have the responsibility of deciding if there's going to be legislation that we support, that we oppose, or that we take no position on. So the purpose of the principal's document is to give us guidance from you all in terms of where a majority of the board would be on various pieces of legislation, knowing that the legislative process is very dynamic. So if you'll go to that, it was in our packet. It's towards the end of the document. So page 11, thank you, Ms. Holloway. So Ethan, will you go ahead and read through those for us? Do you have it in front of you? Okay.
Yeah, I'll let Dr. Brumley give
Just before Ethan reads that, I just want to let everyone know where this document came from. What we did, and correct me if this is inaccurate, Ethan, but what Ethan did is he went back to 2012, 2014, and the last time that there was a position statement document. And he took that information and he refreshed some of the language just to make it consistent with today's language and vernacular and some of the things that are pressing here at the legislature. And then we added 3 bullets Dr. Bofey, we added a fair and honest accountability system that honors student performance, growth, and relevant measures of high school success. We added fostering innovation through maintaining charter school autonomy, and we added maintaining parental rights in education. So we took the original list, did a little bit of a refresh, and then added those 3 bullets, and that's what you have here. And then, Dr. Bofey, you may want to express some of your thoughts around the shift in the name from position to principals, but that also was added, and then Ethan, feel free to work through the list.
Yeah, well, in terms of the shift from position to principals is that we'll have positions on different bills. The purpose of the principals is to guide us in developing those positions. So this is meant to be instructive to us of where a majority of members will fall on particular issues.
Okay, so I'll start going through the list. Stop me if you would like to discuss, or if you want me to just read straight through it. So the Board of Elementary and Secondary Education supports the first, a minimum foundation program that prioritizes students and educators through a teacher pay raise, including differentiated pay options and increased operational funding. The next bullet is that BESE supports providing school and system leaders autonomy to make decisions responsive to local needs without the hindrance of undue red tape and bureaucracy. BESE supports creating innovative ways to bolster the educator pipeline through expanding access to the profession, taking into consideration reducing barriers to entry, eliminating undue processes, and streamlining certification. BESE supports elevating the educator profession by providing resources, professional development, and fostering a supportive environment for all educators. BESE supports recognizing the critical role of teachers as the #1 in-school factor influencing outcomes for students, and supporting educators by promoting a safe teaching environment free from disruption, unnecessary bureaucracy, and external distraction. BESE supports continued implementation of rigorous state standards in courses of study aligned with college and workplace expectations, as measured by high-quality assessments and learning opportunities aligned to such standards and expectations. BESE supports a fair and honest accountability system that honors student performance, growth, and relevant measures of high school success. BESE supports fostering innovation through maintaining charter school autonomy. BESE supports maintaining parental rights in education. BESE supports expanded opportunities for high school students to access career training aligned to regional workforce demands, enabling them to enter the workforce and continue their career development through specialized training and post-secondary education. BESE supports the ability of local school systems to make curriculum decisions and select instructional materials that support students' mastery of academic standards. BESE supports the ability of local school systems to leverage technology resources to enhance teaching and learning and to prepare students to be technology proficient and competitive in the digital age. BESE supports fostering and maintaining a system of choice options for families that promotes excellence for every child. BESE supports maintaining and expanding a high-quality early childhood education system that focuses on quality seats, kindergarten readiness, and accountability. BESE supports enabling system and schools to take the actions necessary to provide for the safety of all students and staff. And finally, BESE supports retaining its role as Louisiana's elementary and secondary education policy-making body. That concludes the list.
Were there any bills about abolishing BESE?
Not this year.
Not this year, maybe because they were limited.
Sometimes this is added there, and it's been in these documents historically, because the legislature constitutionally,
thought about abolishing.
yes.
Yes. Okay, so members, I do want to ask a couple of questions. One is there anything that we've talked about or bills that you've studied that isn't covered by the principles? I think it's important for us to examine the principles and just make sure the topics that we know, I mean, it may not be all of the things that we care about as board members, but it should be relevant to what's going to be discussed at the legislature. So I think that's one question. And I think there's just another question about whether or not these are accurate as far as what we should be using to guide us in coming up with a position statement. Yes, Dr. Davis.
On the second page, page 12, the first item that discusses fostering and maintaining a system of choice options for families that promotes excellence for every child, that there's nothing in there that talks about accountability to the state's taxpayers, right? So including them in an accountability system, right? So if we have public dollars that are promoting choice, that there is a mechanism for accountability. And then also thinking about choice options that provide for equity of expectations for our students.
I made a note of that. Others?
I just want to emphasize, when you look at the second bullet where it says providing school and school system leaders autonomy to make decisions responsive to local needs without the hindrance of undue red tape and bureaucracy. And coupling that with the fostering innovation to maintaining charter school autonomy. I think I'd really like people around the table to let me know if the interpretation of bullet number 2 is similar to the other interpretation. Because we're talking about having local communities and local leaders making decisions responsive to the needs of their community without undue red tape and bureaucracy. Going back to some of the bills that we looked at, which I think maybe, I guess, try to mandate for everyone and does not, that they're careful not to put it in and apply to, say, charter schools, to maintain their local autonomy to do what they have been tasked to do. The same thing should hold true for our school systems when we're talking about making those decisions within our local communities and school districts, as long as we produce in the accountability system and whatever. But I think it's very important that we look at that second bullet as we make some decisions with some of these bills and such, that those local decisions should be best left to local communities and local school boards. And I'm talking attendance zones and transfer policies within their own districts.
Thank
That's one example.
you for the example. I was going to ask you
Yeah.
an example. Thank you.
You know,
Okay.
that community should be able to make the decisions within their own local school systems.
Does that, I know Dr. Davis offered a change. Is there anything in terms of changing the principles? Is it more about the way we interpret and apply the principles that you're talking about?
I'm not sure, I just wanted to emphasize, because we added one here for charter school autonomy, I think we should also begin to think we do have local autonomy as well. We have, I think, in the state, subscribed, our leadership within the state has talked about the people being closest to the children being able to make the best decisions, whether they be parents, local leaders. But sometimes I think our state forgets some of those principles where if we truly feel that those decisions are best made by the people closest to the children, then we need to make that one of our guiding principles as well. That local school systems should be able to make some of these decisions.
And I think that's where this was going to make this part of the gray area. I think just even going back to recess, the example of the recess bill, right, is that it's a 15 minutes for public schools, traditional public schools, not charter schools, if I'm remembering that piece of the discussion right. And so I know in the legislature, people have ideas about what we should be doing differently. And I think we'll have to continue the conversations about those. So, yeah. Looks like it's gonna be a fine couple of months. All right, members, others about the principals, other comments, feedback? Okay. Ms. Davis, Dr. Davis pointed out the first bullet on the second page, you can flip the page, and talked about accountability on that one. And the expectations for students across the different choices as an edit. Is there anyone that would like to make a motion to support these principles? Well, I think that was actually part of the original motion, right? I think that's all building that in. Do we have any public comment cards? All right. Board members, do you have any other comments? Is there any opposition? Hearing none, motion passes. What's our next item?
The next item is the amended item.
Consideration of resolutions regarding school safety officers.
Okay.
And the recommendation is to endorse the resolution.
Mr. Mallard, would you like to talk about this?
Yeah, I'd like to make a motion first.
Okay, a motion.
It's attached.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Do you need a second?
Yes? Okay, we have Ms. Holloway. So we have a motion by Mr. Mallard. Mr. Mallard, I think we need you to read it.
Oh, okay.
Read the motion for us.
Ms. Lawson, I'm not sure.
It's the third sentence on that page.
On motion of?
Yes.
Okay.
So you recommend that the board approve?
Okay. I recommend that the board approve resolution 1 and 2 regarding school safety officers as presented and directed. The BESE executive director process accordingly.
Ms. Holloway, do you want to second that?
A second.
Okay. And then did we have any backup? Did we have written backup on this? I know there was an email. But do we have anything in
The
writing?
resolution.
Okay, I am having trouble finding it
Oh,
right
it's
now.
yours is right here.
Oh, thank you, Ms. Davis.
There's your
Got it.
complete
That's why I
copy
couldn't
picture.
find
You're
it.
gonna have to sign and notarize
Nice.
that.
Okay.
Okay. Just some background, everyone. We have two resolutions that go in tandem with each other. For background, just so everybody can understand how I got here with the resolutions. Everybody knows, or is well aware probably, of the tragic events that happened in Nashville recently. Those events touched home in Louisiana. Two of the victims came from Louisiana. Specifically, one of them came from my district. Born and raised in Leesville, had connections with people in Leesville and moved to Shreveport, had connections with other people that my wife and I are friends with. So that got me, obviously hit home a little bit with us. And then last week in Caddo Parish, a school resource officer prevented a possible school shooting. There was a threat made to a teacher by a student at a high school, and that student left the building, went to their car, retrieved a gun, and the school resource officer stopped that student coming back into the school with a gun, assumedly to go back to make good on their threat. That got me thinking, and even yesterday, a middle school student in Caddo Parish was arrested, or actually, he was arrested yesterday. The threat was made Monday night that he was going to go to a school with a shotgun and set threats to a specific school. There seems to be a lot of these types of things happening. I know last year after the Texas incident, I asked Superintendent Brumley to put on the agenda a discussion item about school safety that led to the school safety, I forgot the exact task force or the summit that we had. So this is not something that's been new to me, but over the weekend, I began thinking and talking with Dr. Brumley and some other individuals, and diving into it a little bit further, we had out of that summit and some of that research last year, some data collected that showed in 2022 November, there was a response and survey sent out to public schools and charter schools in the state. Out of the approximately 1,700, a little over 1,200 responded. So about 73% of schools responded. Out of that 73%, 67% identified having either a school resource officer or a school liaison officer, some sort of school resource officer present at their school. I know I've talked to members of this board that said that their school resource officer made them feel safe. It gave them some comfort, made them feel like they weren't sitting duck. I'm under no illusion that that's going to be a fix-all or, stop everything. But if we can do something to prevent one incident, I think it's worth it. Mr. Morris was telling me earlier, he was somewhere just a few days ago talking to a teacher, and the teacher was in a sling. And he asked the teacher what happened. The teacher was breaking up a fight at their school and suffered a torn rotator cuff. I'd like to think if there was a school resource officer there, maybe that may not happen. Again, if something like that can be prevented, I think that's a good thing. So what my resolution does, the first one asks all governing authorities to enter into agreements with local law enforcement to have a school resource officer or something along those lines there. The second one is obviously you can't do this for free. The second resource asks the legislature to fund it. Talking with Ms. Ellis, and it's something that has been brought up, and I know that this is not, there's consequences. If we take officers off the street, we're going to have to get them somewhere. Ms. Ellis and I were talking yesterday. I'm completely open to, and I hope we look at innovative ways such as going to retired police officers, going to people with law enforcement backgrounds, seeing if we can bring them in, working with the legislature, and working with whatever resource we can to find a solution to this answer, to this problem. We've talked a lot on this board about the teacher shortage. And it's been asked, well, that's a lot to do with money, and it is. But if you talk to teachers, talk to administrators, one of the things that they talk about is, safety concerns. And they talk about issues with discipline. And they talk about a lot of things that I believe a resource officer would be able to help. Again, this is not going to fix everything. We've mentioned this a lot of times today, that it's a tool in the toolbox. I think this is another tool, so I would just ask for support of this resolution and understanding that this isn't the end, this is the beginning. If this passes, we need to start the hard work of finding a way to implement this. Thank you.
Can you restate the statistic around the percentage of our schools that's already covered?
Yeah, Dr. Brumley, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think it's a little over 1,729 schools or something like that. I think 1,257 of those schools responded, and out of that, it was 66.7, so around up to 67% of schools had some sort of resource officer there. Now, the scary part for me is, and I've reached out to some charter people, we don't know, what the response rate, why those either charter schools or even traditional schools didn't respond. I would like to think that simply because they didn't respond didn't mean they didn't have one, but let's assume that's worst case scenario. If every school didn't respond, and every school that didn't respond didn't have one, it would take that 67% number to under 50%.
You said 67% of the 73% who responded.
Correct.
So it's much lower than 67%.
It probably, in reality, is probably much lower. But if you just say it's a zero, it takes it to about 48%, if it's a zero. I would hope that some of the ones that responded, that did not respond, would have that. There's no guarantee there.
And I think in today's climate, you're absolutely right. I think this would be a wonderful initiative. The legislature, you know, if we're looking at this resolution where you have that each Louisiana public school system be allocated, maybe we can mention that the legislature allocate so that they would, you know, get the drift that money has to come from somewhere.
Yeah.
But I've had discussions with our local, I have resource officers in high school, alternative school, but not in, you know, we have the DARE program and those things. We have an in and out of, say, elementary and middle schools with specific programs, but not specifically resource officers. And I've talked with him about increasing the number of resource officers. And what he's saying to me is the same thing that I say to people when we have a teacher shortage. We don't have enough deputies to allocate that many to each and every school. So your idea of talking about, and I don't know how it works with retirement systems with law enforcement. If there is some barrier to them coming back in and serving as a resource officer as opposed to, you know, if that would take legislation. But some alternative, I don't like the idea of just some security company or something like that, because the training for those people is just not where I would like it to be, to put someone in schools. And so if we could work through something with retired officers or trying to get a specialized group of people that would be attached to law enforcement to go through that training, any way that we can to get a qualified person, I'm with you on this, because I really do think it's not going to stop everything that's going to happen, but it will give a comfort level to much of our staff, our parents, and it is somewhat of, you know, a deterrent, and the person who hopefully will respond first if there is a major issue at a school. So is that part of what you're saying? Like,
Yeah,
talk with the
exactly.
legislature maybe takes changes in legislation to allow that
Exactly.
group of people to be able, you know, increase the pool of people that we can talk about.
Exactly. Let's look at innovative ways that we can do this. Exactly.
Mr. Rock?
It's certainly a comfort with an officer. During my tenure in Refuge Parish as assistant sheriff at the time, passed a tax bond issue. And in Refuge Parish, there's a resource officer in every school, all the public schools, all the private schools, and all the non-publics. In Natchitoches Parish, we pay a portion of the salary as an officer. She rotates from same areas to each week. They're all side by side. And she's, throughout the day, she's back and forth. But we're not having a problem, but, you know, it's a compliment to have that officer on campus. Particular one at Menard, I'm most familiar with that one. He constantly patrols campus. You know, he's always at that front entrance, but throughout the day, he's all around. In the parking lot, you know, just advised, you know, there. Of Morris Parish, I have none involved, but I do have an officer in Refuge.
Ms. Ellis?
Yeah, I just wanted to echo your remarks, Mr. Rock. I think that it's a comfort piece to, you know, when we talk about true prevention and being able to stop something that someone really wants to do, you know, a resource officer is a comfort, not always going to be able to stop everything, and we always need to realize that. But, you know, I made the point to Mr. Miller, and as someone who has been in the education realm as a principal, assistant principal, a teacher, I look at that and go, you know, I liked walking in my building knowing there was someone there when something really went wrong. There was someone there to support and to execute things that as a principal maybe I didn't have the tools to do, or as a teacher. But then I also recognize, you know, with municipalities, you've got crime, you've got issues in cities, and they want those police officers on the streets. And so pulling someone from the streets to work in a school, we all want that, but I think the reality is, you know, the police force has a similar issue that we have in education, is that we don't have enough people wanting to do this work. And so an unfunded mandate would be challenging for schools, obviously. There's a partnership involved here. I think it's important. We want to keep our kids safe. And I think the places that are the most underrepresented with school resource officers are typically your elementary schools. The other thing I want to add to this, and just as a point of discussion, is, you know, there's having a resource officer and then there's preventative measures. And one of the things that I really advocate for is, are our doors locked? Do we have proper entrances and exits? And I still think we have a challenge with that across our state. You know, schools that I've experienced in the past where, you know, I had to lock 28 doors down just for a lockdown. And that's in a matter of, you know, seconds, really. You're trying to lock down all these doors. And so I think that there's a lot to be said around the resource officer, but from a safety perspective as a whole, I think we need to start talking about our schools taking the measures necessary to actually prevent and have real entrance and exit points that are safe for our students. And so that's a district decision, I recognize that, and those are things we may or may not want to get directly involved in, but I do think those are conversations to have. This resolution is similar to that, that sometimes we need to put our seatbelts on. I mean, we need to just be safe. And so this is one of those times where maybe there's some more discussion around safety and prevention too.
I think this is very good discussion. Maybe it's something that you could talk about, Dr. Bromley, with the additional, I want to say billions.
Yeah, I mean, look, I mean, I've been screaming this, like, we have to harden the facilities, we just do. I think even, negotiate, if we would have had a conversation around SROs with a group of educators 10 years ago, it would have looked different. But today, I think it's more around, yes, we need those. I think the same is true with like hardening the perimeters, which is why we're using this money that we have specific. 21 million, yeah. And so we're using it specifically for access control. Because it's one-time money, so we wanted to use it for one-time cost. And so we intend to award, you know, $500,000 grants, 42 of them. Bring it to you in June so that you can approve the distribution. And so that's not going to solve across the entire state, but it will be hopefully at least 42 more schools that will have better access control, which means single point of entry, which means locks that work around the facility, to your point, Ms. Ellis. And so I just think that we have to keep this conversation going around the facilities. We have to keep it going around social workers and counselors for our kids and training, like the summit. We're having the summit again. We had 1,000 last year. And then the culture within the schools where kids say something if they see something. So
is there a limit on the grants from districts?
Yeah, so we're doing $500,000 grants. And so our intent is that we would fund 42.
It's a really, you know, for those of us who are working in schools or have that particular responsibility, and I'm just going to, back in 2016, we were the first school system in the state. We partnered with the LSU Stevenson Disaster Management Institute and our local Office of Homeland Security, and we wrote a safety plan for every school within our district. We partnered with the Sheriff's Department, the Fire Department, the ambulance service. You know, we had vantage points for where the snipers would be and where our reunification center and all that. I mean, we had probably, you know, the most elaborate, that we were told, the most elaborate plan in the state. We did this in 2016. We came back last year, re-partnered with them, and the next military guy runs that, Colonel Grant, the LSU Disaster Management Institute, and went more deeply into it and updated everything, really because of the pandemic and such, but looked at the hardening of the perimeter, which we've done, and we're trying to finish up single points of entry on the older buildings and such. But the directives keep changing. You know, for example, when you started and you do a lockdown in a school, you know, it was, the doors are locked, you know, you make sure they're locked. When we do our drills, you know, we go through and make sure all the doors are locked with law enforcement and such. but the doors are locked, the kids are huddled in a corner or whatever. Now, if you look at, I hate to say the Nashville one, what they did was, you notice there was a small school, a couple hundred kids, left their classrooms and went into that, their church hall or whatever. Now there's a thought about, do you lock down in a classroom? Do you open up and run free? I mean, there are so many factors involved in this, because when you're looking at an active shooter coming in, not much is going to stop them if they're coming. The person at the Nashville just shot through all of the glass and, the entrance, which was locked. So all these deterrents help, but when school systems were all doing this independently, they tell us, they want us to go present with them at their next safety conference and what they've done with us and what our plans look like. And I'm still not real sure we're doing everything that we can or should be doing. But there's got to be a lot more dialogue with people who are more expert in this endeavor and with the leaders of the school system. And look, it's great that I'm hoping I get one of those grants, but as we go through the finalization. No, but the point is, we're all fine with these things. But we really need, I guess, a very holistic view with the leaders of all the school systems and schools within the state and the people who have studied this nationally maybe and know the best way to approach it so that systems are not going in different directions. Oh, I think I need to do this first, or I need to do that first, or how do I get a basic thing in place? How do I build out from there? The plans themselves take an awful lot. And then we're going to, all of these tabletop discussions, putting scenarios out. What do we do with this? Critiquing what we did or what we would have done. And then would they come in and tell us, well, maybe you need to look at this, and that. This is not just a one-time, hey, let's throw this out there and everything will be fine. Because the society we live in today, it's been proven over and over again, everything is not fine. So if we do anything at the state level, I think it would, and I know we have the summits, I know we have the conferences and such, but if we could just get narrowly the leaders of school systems and schools in the state with the really, some people we think are the most expert at this, and talk through a graduated plan of, well, if you're here right now, this is where you need to start, and this is then the next step where you need to go. And I think it's the time now to make that happen, rather than a conference where you go to these different little breakout sessions. It's got to be very pointed, and I've narrowed the audience to where every superintendent or charter leader, whoever we have in there, and really begin, here's where you need to start, and here's how you build out.
Everybody's just in different places, and then you have different entities for law enforcement that have different beliefs. Dr. Sandler, when is the date on the safety summit this year?
June 15th.
June 15th. So
What, 15th?
June the 15th.
June 15th.
So certainly invite everyone to attend. We had a great session last year.
This is the 18th.
Can I ask a quick question?
Yes.
So I like the part of the resolution that talks about the school resource officer being certified by various agencies, and especially in light of the fact that there's a lot of research that shows having law enforcement officers on campus can lead to increased rates of students interacting with juvenile justice, right? So I like that there's a certification process for that. And my question is about what already exists. Do you know if the current revised statute that the resolution quotes that says that LEAs can partner with local law enforcement agencies, are those officers in those partnerships also required to be certified school resource officers? Or can they just be a regular police officer?
Yeah, they have to be certified school resource officers.
Thank you.
They go through specialized training.
Great,
Okay.
yeah.
Great.
Special.
And you've got to have someone who really wants to do this. Most of your police officers don't want to be doing this.
Mr. Mellering pointed out some of the statistics around this. I just want to reiterate what he said on those numbers. So last year, we surveyed systems and we had a 73% response rate. And so of the 73% response rate of schools, 67% of those said that they had a school resource officer. And so if we just do some estimations and we scale that out, and we say that if 100% would have responded at 67%, it means we would need 571-ish more SROs across the state. And I'm like Ms. Ellis, I believe that overwhelmingly the schools that probably don't have them are the elementary schools. Because I don't know about you, Superintendent, but I seldom see a high school now that doesn't have them. So it's predominantly elementary would be my belief.
And where do most of the school shootings occur?
Elementary.
Neighbors, any other comments on the item?
Motion and a second.
Do we have a public comment? Public comment. Is there any exception to the motion? Hearing none, motion passes. Next item, please.
That concludes the agenda.
Mr. Lawson.
Yes, I have an update real quick. House Ed is listening in. They just told Shannon and I, we will not have an House Education Committee meeting on the first week of session. We have 12 allotted meetings. Doesn't mean we will use all of them, but it will not begin on the first week of session. We do, however, have a budget hearing next week on the 12th, which will also include the MFP for a portion of it. So if BESE president or our BESE representative would like to be there to discuss those things. Thank you so much for the meeting today. I want to send a special thanks to our staff department for analyzing all of these. And also I look forward to representing you again this year.
Oh, thank you.
2 hour meeting.
Yes. Summit.
So much better.
Ms. Holloway? Yeah.
Put this on our radar. I know we talked about retreat, and then now we're hearing about the summit on
Yes.
June 15th.
Yes.
We meet 13, 14, so
Yeah.
Monday.
Retreat on the Monday as a possibility.
So
Okay.
just thought.
Thank you for that. In June. I also wanted to add to the safety discussion, the value of the Rate Panic Button app. So we use it at my school. I think when you study these issues, time and communication are very important factors. And so I would encourage you to talk to people in your systems. It does take a little bit of clerical work to get it up and running. But I had somebody walk on campus the other day and a student looked at me, she goes, "What's he here for?" And I said, "I've checked in with him, he's fine." And she said, "Well, you know, all those school shootings." I said, "I do know, but I can also have authorities on their way here in 1.5 seconds. And she just kind of relaxed, right? I mean, we do have an SRO on our campus, but the fact that to be able to communicate, the students are thinking about it too. So, and their safety matters to their learning. So I would entertain a motion to adjourn. Thank you, Mr. Rock, second by Mr. Mellerin. Thank you, guys.
Call it, if y'all have anybody.